The Three Brothers. There was once upon a time a witch who, in the shape of a hawk, used every night to break the windows of a certain village church. In the same village there lived three brothers who were all determined to kill the mischievous hawk, but in vain did the two eldest mount guard in the church with their guns. As soon as the bird appeared high above their heads, sleep overpowered them, and they only awoke to hear the windows crashing in. Then the youngest brother took his turn of guarding the windows, and to prevent his becoming overcome with sleep, he placed a lot of thorns under his chin, so that if he felt drowsy or nodded his head, they would prick him and keep him awake. The moon was already risen, and it was as light as day, when suddenly he heard a fearful noise, and at the same time a terrible desire to sleep overpowered him. His eyelids closed and his head sank on his shoulders, but the thorns ran into him and were so painful that he awoke at once. He saw the hawk swooping down upon the church, and in a moment he had seized his gun and shot the bird. The hawk fell heavily under a big stone, severely wounded in its right wing. The youth ran to look at it, and saw that a huge abyss had opened below the stone. He went at once to fetch his brothers, and with their help, he dragged a lot of pine wood and ropes to the spot. They fastened some of the burning pine wood to an end of a rope, and let it slowly down to the bottom of the abyss. At first, it was quite dark, and the flaming torch only lit up the dirty gray stone walls. But the youngest brother, determined to explore the abyss, and letting himself down by the rope, he soon reached the bottom. Here he found a lovely meadow full of green trees and exquisite flowers. In the middle of the meadow stood a huge stone castle with an iron gate leading to it, which was wide open. Everything in the castle seemed to be made of copper, and the only inhabitant he could discover was a lovely girl who was combing her golden hair. He noticed that whenever one of her hairs fell on the ground, it rang out like pure metal. The youth looked at her more closely, and saw that her skin was smooth and fair. Her bright blue eyes were sparkling, and her hair as golden as the sun. He fell in love with her on the spot, and kneeling at her feet, he implored her to become his wife. Princess. Isn't it a princess? The girl accepted his proposal gladly, but at the same time she warned him that she could never come up to the world above until her mother, the old witch, was dead. And she went on to tell him that the only way in which the old creature could be killed was with the sword that hung up in the castle, but the sword was so heavy that no one could lift it. Then the youth went into a room of the castle where everything was made of silver, and here he found another beautiful girl, the sister of his bride. She was combing her silver hair, and every hair that fell out on the ground rang as like pure metal. The second girl handed him the sword, but though he tried with all his strength, he could not lift it. At last the third sister came to him and gave him a drop of something to drink, which she said would give him the needed strength. He drank one drop, but he still could not lift the sword. Then he drank a second. The sword began to move. But only after he had drunk a third drop was he able to swing the sword over his head. Then he hid himself in the castle and awaited the old witch's arrival. At last, as it was beginning to grow dark, she appeared. She swooped down upon the big apple tree, and after shaking some golden apples from it, she pounced down upon the earth, and soon as her feet touched the ground, she became transformed from a hawk into a woman. This was the moment the youth had been waiting for. He swung the mighty sword in the air with all his strength, and the witch's head fell off, and blood spurted up on the walls. Without fear of any further danger, he packed up all the treasures and castles in the great chest, and gave his brothers a signal to pull up out of the abyss. First the treasures were attached to the rope, and then the three lovely girls. Now everything was above, and only he himself remained below. But as he was a little suspicious of his brothers, he fastened a heavy stone on the rope, and let them pull it up. At first they heaved with a will, but when the stone was halfway up, they let it drop suddenly, and it fell to the bottom and broke into 100 pieces. So, that's what would have happened to my bones if I had trusted them, the youth said sadly, and he began to cry bitterly, not because of the treasures, but because of the lovely girl with the swan-like neck and the golden hair. For a long time he wandered sadly through this beautiful underworld, and one day he met a magician who asked him the cause of his tears. The youth told him all that had befallen him, and the magician said, "Do not grieve, young man. If you will guard the children who are hidden in the golden apple tree, I will bring you up at once to the earth. Another magician who lives in this land always eats my children up. It is in vain that I have bidden them under the earth and locked them into a castle. Now I have hidden them in the apple tree. Hide yourself there too, and at midnight you will see my enemy." The youth climbed up the tree and picked some of the golden beautiful apples, which he ate for supper. At midnight, the wind began to rise, and a rustling sound was heard at the foot of the tree. The youth looked down and beheld a long, thick serpent beginning to crawl up the tree. It wound itself around the stem and gradually got higher and higher. It stretched its huge head, in which the eyes glistened fiercely among the branches, searching for the nests in which the little children lay. They trembled in terror when they saw the hideous creature and hid themselves beneath the leaves. Then the youth swung his mighty sword through the air and with one blow cut off the serpent's head. He cut up the rest of the body into little bits and strewed them about in the four winds. The father of the rescued children was so delighted over the death of his enemy that he told the youth to get on his back, and in this way he carried him up to the world above. With what joy did he hurry now to his brother's house. He burst into a room where they were all assembled, but no one knew who he was. Only his bride, who was serving as cook to her sisters, recognized her lover at once. His brothers, who had quite believed he was dead, yielded him up to his treasures at once and flew into the woods in terror. But the good youth forgave them all they had done, and divided his treasures with them. Then he built himself a big castle with golden windows, and there he lived happily with his golden-haired wife till the end of their lives.